Welcome back to yet another episode of the Oracle Parlor podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jenny, aka Phantasma Witch, and today we are going to be talking about empaths and clairempathy. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, hang tight. We are going to get into it. But specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about how having clairempathy can actually be really, really useful to us as readers, but also just in the day-to-day mundane life. So, before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what an empath is. So, when I say empath in this episode, I'm not talking about being empathetic. I'm talking about having the psychic sense of clear empathy. And before I get too much further into this, I do want to add a little disclaimer at the beginning here, like always, that these are based off of my personal experiences and my personal practices. So if this doesn't resonate with you, don't worry. Take what works, leave the rest, and just know that everybody experiences these things differently. And that's absolutely normal for you to have your own personal experience or belief around these things. You do not have to agree with me. Use your own personal discernment. Use what resonates. So, back to empath versus clear empathy. So, yeah, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the psychic sense of clear empathy. So, clear empathy means clear feeling. And when we're talking about feeling, we're not talking about physical feeling, we're talking about the emotional feeling. So, clear empathy, while it is not a word in the dictionary, we do know that these two words combined mean these two things separately, clear and feeling. Clear empathy, though, is in the category of what is known as an ESP. ESP stands for extrasensory perception, which is defined by Merriam-Webster as perception, as in telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition, that involves awareness of information about events external to the self, not gained through the senses and not deducible from previous experience, versus empathy, where the definition for empathy in Merriam-Webster is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. The act of imagining one's ideas, feelings, or attitudes as fully inhabiting something observed, such as a work of art or natural occurrence. So, as you can see, one of these things is not like the other. So, when we're talking about clear empathy, the ESP version of clear empathy, the psychic sense, we are talking about receiving and feeling and experiencing feelings which are not our own, which is received through some sort of external and is not something that we are sensing ourselves. We're not feeling it because it's our personal feelings. We're not feeling it because someone close to us is feeling those feelings and we also are affected by it. There's a difference. With empathy, it's totally normal that if someone who is extremely close to you is having a really hard time of it, and let's say they're having an emotional breakdown with you and they start crying and you're crying with them because you're so sad for them, you feel for them, you understand that sadness, and it makes you sad too. That's different. So it's very important that we define these two things as two separate, completely different things before we really get into this episode. Because there's sometimes this a bit of confusion of, oh, being empathetic doesn't mean you're an empath. Yeah, absolutely. Being empathetic does not mean you're an empath. But someone who is empathetic can be an empath. Absolutely. But these are two different things that we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. So I like to try to give examples when I'm talking about the clairs and psychic senses. I like to give examples of media where we see this. So my favorite one to give for clear empathy is very, very nerdy, and I apologize if you don't know, you don't know. If you know, you know. And we're friends now. And that's Deanna Troy from Star Trek Next Generation. Oh my gosh, I love Next Generation. But this is not a Star Trek podcast, so we're not going to get into it. But I do want to talk a little bit about this character in media and how empathy is used in media. So, Deanna Troy, to give you a little background for those of you non-Trekkie fans out there, Deanna Troy is essentially the therapist on the ship. And for anyone who really doesn't know, Star Trek is a sci-fi show that takes place on a spaceship in space. And the ship is called the Enterprise. So essentially, Deanna Troy is like the therapist on this ship. And the type of alien species that she is has the ability to sense the physical and emotional feelings of others around her. And that's what gives her the ability to be such a great therapist on the ship because she can truly feel what the other people are feeling. And this also comes in handy because she is able to assist the captain and everyone else on the ship when they encounter possibly new alien species and they cannot communicate with them, but she can feel what they feel. And this is what I want to get into today. And this is why I am bringing Deanna Troy up because empath empathetic abilities, psychic empathetic abilities, clairempathy is so often seen as something that's like really annoying and frustrating. But like Deanna Troy, we can actually use it to our benefit and for the benefit of others. And that is the end goal for this episode that I want to talk a little bit about. So, I want to give you an example of my own personal story of being an empath, having a clair empathetic moment where it really did help me. And I was able to use it in a way that was beneficial for everyone involved on a very minor level, not as big as Deanna Troy saving, the Enterprise, but, So, as you may or may not know, I used to work in animation as a full-time artist. And during that time, obviously, I worked at a lot of studios. And this was before COVID, the pandemic. So going into the studio was just a normal occurrence. And for me, I am an early bird. I get up very early. I tend to also go to bed early. And this meant that I was usually the first person in the studio. And this meant that I was usually the first person to greet everybody else in the studio. And so one day I had gotten to the studio early and I was doing my usual thing. And I was saying hi to the people as they came through. And one person that I worked with came through the doors. And I said, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And they responded in kind, "Hey, pretty good. How about you?" Nothing, absolutely nothing about their demeanor, their body language, the way that they spoke, their expression, nothing gave the hint that something was off or something was wrong. But my Claire empathy kicked in immediately, and I could sense immense sadness from this person. And this person always was very, very smiley, very jolly, very happy. We always chit-chatted and had lots of good jokes and stuff. And this was just someone I didn't even know that well. I just knew them in passing at work. But my clear empathy kicked in, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me when they walked in. And I was like, no, something's up. And so after a moment, I let them kind of go get seated. And I said, "Hey, you know, is everything okay?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "No, like really, do you want to talk? Like, it's okay if you don't, like, but are you doing okay?" And then the mask fell. And this person who was always smiley and cheerful, their expression shift, their emotions came to the surface and they said, actually, no, I'm not okay. And they were very sad. And they told me that they had gotten into a disagreement with their partner that morning and it really bummed them out and they felt bad. And they appreciated that I had taken the time to ask them and just check in and that I was able to sense that. And so this is a very small example of how our clear empathetic abilities can come forward and how it can actually be really helpful because it did help this person a lot to be able to get that off their chest and to talk about it and to actually express themselves without having to wear the mask at work, which was something really hard for them. And luckily we had a we had a coffee shop right next to where this studio was. So I took them on a walk and I was like, hey, let's just go get some air. But if my clear empathy, if my psychic sense had not kicked in at that moment, I would not have known that this coworker was going through it and needed to take a breather and needed to kind of let off some steam before getting into working. So that's just a little example of what that's like. So, as clairempathetic people, we can experience things like this, such as feeling other people's current emotional state of being, like with this story where this person walked in and I knew exactly what they felt in that moment. Another common occurrence that used to happen to me, not anymore, and I'll talk about why that is I would go to the grocery store and I distinctly remember one time I went, I think, to like the deli counter or something to get some cuts of meat or something. I'm not really sure what you get at a deli counter. So I went to the deli counter, and as I had been walking around, I felt perfectly fine. There was nothing going on with me. But as soon as I talked to the person behind the counter, I felt extremely stressed. I felt extremely overwhelmed. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. And then when I got done with this interaction with the person at the deli counter, I felt fine. So we can feel what people are feeling in the moment. We can feel the energetic resonance of a location. It doesn't have to be a person either. It can be an actual physical location. This is that feeling of walking into a building and then you feel off, and then you feel some sort of emotional off, like weird. And this is also something that used to happen to me quite a lot. And again, we'll talk about why it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it used to be I would walk into a location and I may feel nervous, or I may suddenly feel angry, or I may suddenly feel scared, or I may suddenly feel, whatever emotion was coming up. And then as soon as I would leave the location, I'd feel perfectly fine, as if it never happened, as if nothing. I'm shrugging in the video, as if nothing. We can also feel the collective emotional state of being. And this one can be very overwhelming, whether or not you consider yourself an empath and have clear empathetic abilities. If you're highly sensitive to energies, you're going to feel that shift, especially if that shift is very big. So, one of the most recent examples I can give of this is some of you may know that at the beginning of this year in 2025, LA caught on fire. And it was massive. It was very, very, very stressful. A lot of people lost their homes. Some people lost family. A lot of people lost pets. And it was out of control. And it was very, very, very intense for everyone. I personally was riding the line of an evacuation zone for weeks. So I had my bags packed and I was living out of suitcases for weeks. And it was stressful for everyone. But on top of my own feelings of what was going on with the fire, add on top of that the layer of I was also feeling everyone's collective grief, everyone's collective energetic stress because all of the stress, all of the grief, all of these feelings had been so heightened and were constantly every day being heightened. And when I realized at a certain point that it wasn't just me, that I wasn't just feeling my own feelings, and that is a practice, my friends. That takes time. That takes energy and effort to get to the point to be able to say, wait a minute, that's not mine. So as I'm sharing these stories, please don't feel like, oh man, I don't know how to do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not. No, 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 no. Everyone is where they're at this given moment. I've had a lot of years of experience learning how to deal with this and manage it and, work with it. And notice the vocabulary I'm using, deal with it and manage it. And this is why I'm going to try to break this habit within this podcast episode myself. But it takes time and effort to learn the difference. And so I became acutely aware that what I was feeling wasn't just my own stress and grief and sadness. It was everything. It was everyone in the local area. And as soon as was able to realize that, and as soon as I was able to acknowledge that, I was able to do the work to come back to myself, to release everything else I had been taking on. And then I was able to feel just my feelings of grief, just my stress, just my sadness. And that was way more manageable than feeling everyone, all the collective in the local area. So, as I'm talking about this, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, who would want to be an empath? That sounds really, really stressful and annoying and frustrating. And honestly, like, that's what I thought. When I first learned that I was an empath and what that was, most of the books, most of the stories I had heard and had read made clairempathy sound like a burden to bear. And I was really bummed out when I found out I was an empath. I was like, I don't want this curse. A little dramatic, but I had essentially had a reading and someone had told me, you have clear empathy. You're an empath, like really intensely. Like you need to do some things to manage this. And I was what is known as an underdeveloped empath. And this is an episode for another time. I will add it to the list. If you are interested, send me an email, drop a comment. Let me know if you want to learn more about underdeveloped empaths, but it's just a whole big topic on its own. But I was definitely an underdeveloped empath. And one of the things that comes with being an underdeveloped empath is being highly, highly, highly sensitive, feeling everything and not being able to filter out, not being able to acknowledge and recognize what is or is not ours. And that causes energetic and emotional burnout. So, this is why it's so important for empaths to make sure that they are working towards understanding themselves, working towards being able to decipher what's theirs and what is not. And again, this is a huge, huge topic. I mean, I could literally write a I could write a book on this topic because this is something that has been really important to me and something I've really studied because it was something that was really affecting me personally. But being able to say, "Oh, wait, this isn't mine," that starts with understanding yourself. That starts with being able to feel your own feelings. And guess what? I'm still not good at feeling my feelings. I am still working on that, but it's a constant practice. It's a constant development. Just like life is not a straight line of ups and downs. Life is a zippity zoopity floopity floppity all over the freaking place. You know, this is the same thing when it comes to learning things like this and honing skills. Even someone you may consider a master of a skill is still developing, is still learning, still growing. They always should be. They should never claim to know it all. They should never claim to be able to, you know, just saying, that's my personal opinion as a forever student and teacher. But it takes time to be able to get to that point, and it's still something that takes getting used to and getting back into the flow and being able to feel your own feelings and know what you feel like inside and out. Know what you feel when you feel those feelings. Okay, I feel like I'm just saying feeling a lot. Feel, 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 feel. But you get the idea. Asking yourself those questions, being mindful of you, of how you are, will help you to determine those things. Because we don't want to be an energetic sponge. And to prevent ourselves from being an energetic sponge, to prevent energetic burnout and emotional burnout, we have to ward and shield ourselves. We have to be able to draw boundaries. I'm going to keep talking about it, and I feel like almost every podcast episode, so you'll have to deal with it. But boundaries are so important, whether you are dealing with the living, the deceased, or energy and your own skills and abilities as um, someone who has these psychic senses, these intuitive senses and abilities. And by the way, if learning about shielding and warding is something that interests you, I have a full class on this topic on my website, phantasmawitch.com. You can get that class there. I'm going to be trying to circulate doing a live version of this class, so not just a recording, so people can actually come and ask questions and really dive deep into it. And of course, you can always book a consultation with me to work one-on-one with me so you can further deepen, understand, and enhance your own personal abilities in a way that is more personalized to you. So, with that out of the way, as energetic and emotional sponges, we have a really hard time processing and releasing that which is not ours. So, for people who are really sensitive to energies or clairempathic, those emotions, those energies can get stuck in our own body, energetically and physically. And I'm not saying this to scare anybody. I never want to fearmonger. I never want to fearmonger. I want you to know the information so you can better understand it, so you can empower yourself to say, oh, yeah, that sounds intense, but it really isn't. And I know how I can turn that around. So just know that you absolutely can learn how to process and release so it doesn't get stuck. But, anyways, when this happens, when it gets stuck in us, it can appear energetically and physically. And I already said that, but I want to clarify that I'm not saying this as a medical practitioner. I'm not saying this as someone who is a therapist. I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a licensed practitioner of health or medical anything in that regards. I may be an energetic, worker who has certification in Reiki, but that does not at all equal the same thing as a licensed medical professional or mental health professional. And I want to make that very clear. When energy and emotions get stuck in our body and we do not feel them, process them, and release them, it can cause issues, which can then physically manifest, such as a stomach ache. This is the best example I can give because guess what? Our vagus nerve is literally the core entanglement of that vagus nerve is in our stomachs. It's in the pit of our stomachs. This is why when we are nervous, when we're stressed, when we're anxious, we feel like we're going to get sick. We feel like we have a stomach ache. That's why. It's because the vagus nerve is being activated and it's tensing all the muscles in the area, and all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I feel sick. So when we are unconsciously absorbing other people's emotions, or energies, because we're clairempathic, it can get stuck in that center, in that pit of our gut. And when it sits there, it activates us in a very physical way. And that activation can feel very similar to what it feels like to be nervous, to be scared or anxious, even though we personally have no logical reason for it. We're not, our anxiety hasn't been activated or triggered. We're not having any kind of like activation of our own personal things, and it's just coming up out of nowhere. And again, this is a whole topic for another day, but there are lots of ways to determine these things. And I may teach a class on it at some point on empathic abilities, but the longer it sits there, the more uncomfortable that is, and the harder it is to release it. So this is why it's so important to take these preemptive measures to be able to shield ourselves, to ward ourselves, to be able to better process those things. So I'll give you an example that happened fairly recently. And if you follow me on TikTok, you may have already seen this story, so my apologies. But I'll give you an example of something that happened recently where I forgot to put up a shield before I went out. So, me and my partner had to take my cat to the vet recently just for a general checkup. Nothing important, out of the ordinary, intense. And my cats, they don't really like going to the vet. They are not fans, I could say. And so, because of this, I will do my best to make sure they're as comfortable as possible. I'll give them a little CBD treat for pets, like for cats before we go. I'll cushion out their carrier so that way they feel like they can get comfortable. And one of my cats, the one that we took, she likes to hide in the blanket in the carrier. So she can't see anything. No one can see her. She doesn't want to be perceived, and she likes it that way. And when we went to the vet, I found a spot in a corner where nobody could really be around us, so she could really be alone. And I was facing her carrier and the wall. And what I was doing was I was just trying to send her like energy of feeling safe, of feeling loved, that she's okay. And so I was not paying attention to my surroundings. I couldn't see anything other than my cat and her carrier and the wall in front of me. And my partner was sitting directly next to me, so behind me technically, because I was faced the other way. And as I was doing this, now I never, from the time I left my place to the time that I arrived, I never felt my cat being terrified or fearful. I felt her definitely being like, don't perceive me, don't perceive me, don't perceive me. That was more her energy, was just like, just don't perceive me, just don't, because she has a little bit of spicy feral cat energy, and that's her spicy feral cat like energy is like she doesn't want to be perceived. She doesn't want to be looked at. She wants to be hidden. So that's all I got from her. But out of nowhere, I'm sitting there, and suddenly I feel extremely anxious. I feel so terrified. I'm so scared that I'm not able to breathe. It feels like an actual panic attack. If you've ever had a panic attack, breathing becomes really difficult, at least for me, because it triggers my asthma. And so I'm sitting there and I'm having a hard time breathing. My heart is racing. I'm feeling so anxious and so nervous for no reason. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I thought, oh my gosh, did I eat something? Did I like I was going through my list because this is where discernment comes in. We never want to immediately jump to like paranormal or psychic immediately. We want to ask the mundane questions first. So that's what I was trying to do because I for sure thought this was just a mundane thing that was happening to me. I thought, okay, maybe I had too much caffeine. No, I didn't really have caffeine today. Did I have too much sugar? No, I didn't have sugar today. Did I not eat enough? No, I just had lunch like only an hour or two ago. And so I was kind of going through my list and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So at that point, I was like, whatever, I don't care where this is coming from. I just need to process and release. So part of my processing and releasing involves somatic techniques. So these are techniques that I learned prior to going in for surgery for my endometriosis. It was what I was taught by my physical therapist and somatic therapist. So I started shaking my leg and I started doing breathing exercises with my eyes closed. And despite this, I was still having a hard time processing and letting it go. It was still very loud in my body. The breathing and the leg shaking did help a little bit. I want to clarify that. So, right as this is happening, the vet tech comes and calls us, and we go into the back room. And when we get to the back room, I feel perfectly fine. All of a sudden, it's completely gone. I no longer feel terrified. I no longer feel scared. I no longer feel anxious and overwhelmed. I'm fine. And I was like, huh, that's strange. And I hadn't said anything to my partner. And my partner turns to me and they say, are you doing better? And I was like, how did you know something was wrong? Of course they knew something was wrong. And they said, well, you were doing your breathing and you were doing your leg shaking. And I know usually that's a sign that you're like going through something. And I said, yeah. And I told them, all of a sudden I was feeling super anxious. I was panicked and I felt almost fearful, but it wasn't coming from our cat. So I don't know what was going on. And he said, oh, yeah, I think I know what was going on. And I was like, what? Like, any kind of explanation at this point would be lovely because I couldn't figure it out. And my partner says, yeah, there was a German Shepherd with their owner sitting not too far from you, behind you, that you couldn't see. And that dog was terrified of being there at the vet. Like, this dog was not making a single sound, but was full body shakes, tail between its legs, licking its nose. Like, poor thing. Like, my heart broke when my partner told me this, because then I realized, oh my gosh, I was feeling this dog. I was feeling the emotions that this dog was experiencing. And when I realized that, I was so thankful that someone had witnessed this that I was with, who knows me. Because, like, if my partner had not witnessed that and had not seen that, I would have just wrote that off as like, well, who knows? I don't know what was going on. I must have had a day. But my partner was able to witness it and tell me, which was very insightful because it was then that I realized I did not put up a shield. And I usually do because I am super sensitive to energies and emotions of others and other places. And it's it, it's overwhelming if I'm not shielding. And when we had left that morning, that day, I just did not shield. And I didn't realize it until my partner told me about this dog. And I realized, oh my gosh, I didn't shield. And I was feeling everything around me, specifically this dog. And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about how I no longer have this problem where it's like too much, too much. I would go to the grocery store and I could feel the person at the deli counter. I would, go to work and my coworker, I could feel what my coworker was feeling. And I don't have that happen as often anymore because I put shields up, because I put up boundaries, energetic boundaries. So I could filter these things out and be able to process them much better than before. But when I do forget, oh, I can feel it. I know when I've forgotten, usually because by the end of the day, I am tired. I am emotionally drained. I am super burned out. I'll be out and about and I'll just feel feelings out of nowhere. And this isn't always negative feelings, by the way. I do want to clarify. I have definitely felt people's joy. I have definitely felt people's like, I'll give another quick story before we move on here. And that is one of the funniest experiences I've ever had as an empath was me and my partner will sometimes go to the gym together. And because of my disability, I mostly just stay in the area where people stretch and then I get on like a treadmill. So I was in the area where most people stretch, but this is also an area where people will do like free weights in front of the mirror. And so it was a busy day that day, and the area that I was in was pretty busy. And I was just doing my usual stretches and my usual physical therapy. And as I'm there doing my stretches and my physical therapy, I suddenly am feeling like real good about myself. Like real good. Like I'm like, heck yeah, I feel good. Ooh, yeah, I am nailing these stretches. I'm so strong. Like I felt so empowered and so good, which is funny because that day before I went into the gym, I was actually feeling like garbage. Physically and mentally, I was not feeling good about myself. I did not physically feel good because I was kind of achy. I didn't feel strong and empowered, but as soon as I got over to those mats and I started doing my stretches, oh my gosh, I felt so good and so empowered. Closing the blinds real quick, so if you can hear that, my apologies. And so I'm sitting there and I'm doing my stretches and exercises, feeling really good about myself. And then as soon as I left that area to go to the treadmills, it went away. And I went back to feeling like garbage about myself. And then I realized someone in the area of the gym that I was at was really vibing with themselves and feeling really good about their workout and their body. And that gave me a little self-confidence boost on accident. Like I accidentally was picking up on their empathic, that energy, that emotion that they were putting out. And it was a nice little boost, to be honest. Now this isn't, and I want to be clear, and this is something that we can talk about in a different episode. Energy vampires are not the same as people with empathic gifts. Now, does that mean that people with empathic abilities, I shouldn't say gifts, I hate calling it gifts, people with empathic uh, heightened sensitivities, psychic sense of clairempathy, does that mean that they can't become an energy vampire? No, they totally can. But hey, guess what? So can everyone. Anyone can become an energy vampire at any given time. Anybody can unconsciously be an energy vampire. And I'm gonna write that down. We're gonna do this another episode, energy vampires, but I just want to make that very clear because this was something I had gotten asked quite a lot on one of my TikTok videos. No, being a clair empathic person does not make you an energy vampire. No. So, with all that being said, as you can see, it's not always a bad thing. If someone's feeling really good and really positive, it can actually be really nice to just get like a little boost of serotonin and be like, oh, that person's feeling really good about themselves. Now I feel good about myself. And I'll try to, remember that when I leave the gym, not to feel so bad about myself, right? So, believe it or not, being an empath can be extremely, extremely useful, especially if you are a reader. So if you're a reader and you have heightened clair empathy, you can use that to your advantage to create deeper readings for your client and a deeper intuitive knowing for yourself during that reading. So one of the things that can happen is you can sense how your client feels prior to the reading actually beginning. So more often than not, when someone sits down at my table, like if I'm working at the cafe, Tarot Tuesdays at Three Sisters Coffee and Tea in Burbank, just a little drop there. When I'm working at the cafe and somebody comes up to my table and takes a seat, my clair empathy automatically will kick in most of the time. And I will be able to feel what they are feeling, even if that person is not expressing it and not showing it through body language or expression or words. And one of the most common ones that happens is nervousness. I can sense somebody's nervous energy as soon as they sit down, even if the person seems really chill, even if the person seems really excited, even if the person is doing a best not to express anything at all. Because there are some people who are like that when they come get a reading. They don't want to be cold read, and I get it. But sometimes I will be able to, my clear empathy will kick in, and I'm like, okay, this person's really nervous. And this is so helpful because as a reader, if you are sensing let's say, nervousness from your client, from your sitter, whether they're on Zoom or in person, if you can sense that, you can take a moment to assist with that. So, what I like to do is if I sense that someone's nervous, I will tell them, like, okay, hey, like, I'm kind of feeling that you're nervous. And usually they'll laugh, and that alone will break the ice. And then I'll just invite them to kind of do a couple of deep breaths, shake it out. Sometimes I'll make jokes and act a little silly, and that usually will like kind of help with that. So clear empathy can really be useful in those moments. It can also be useful if your sitter sits down and the topic that they want to discuss, if you start feeling emotions regarding those topics that they are asking you about, it can be, again, really insightful to be like, oh, okay, so this person, when they bring up this topic, they're sad. And it's bringing up these emotions for them. And that gives you more insights on the reading, but also how to hold space for your sitter. During readings, you may also feel a shift in your sitter's emotions, which can give you, again, more context, more insights during the reading. Sometimes during a reading, if I say something that maybe they needed to hear, all of a sudden I can sense a release and an emotional shift from I'm feeling tense and feeling nervous to oh, and it almost feels like they physically sit back in their chair. Like emotionally, I can feel like this shift from like uncertainty or nervousness to kind of like a lighthearted, like more wonder. I don't know how else to explain that, but that alone can help me be like, okay, so this really resonated with them. Or sometimes it can also be the reverse where I'll be talking to them and it'll happen where I'm talking to them and they are like nodding and smiling and they're like, yeah, that makes total sense. But I can emotionally feel their heart drop, heaviness. And then I have to pause and be like, okay, okay, something just changed there. What happened? And it's always funny because when I bring that up, people will, their eyes get big and they're like, they're looking around and they might laugh and they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, because I could feel your emotional shift. It just like a switch. And that can help because then you can further investigate with your sitter and ask those questions and dive deeper into the reading. If you're someone who can sense spirits or you're a medium, oh my gosh, empathy can help so much to further understand what that spirit is going through, who they are in a way. Recently, I uh, was asked to do a clearing of a location. And at this location, there was a spirit. And the first thing that came through were the emotions. And then other psychic senses came through. But we're focusing on clear empathy right now as best as I can. And when I started sensing the emotions of this person, the immediate emotions, I did not get the feeling whatsoever that this spirit was negative or bad or malicious because they didn't have any of the emotions that would be associated with that. They didn't have anger, they didn't have sadness, they didn't have any of these like more difficult emotions. And sadness isn't bad per se, like it's totally normal for anyone living or deceased to feel the feelings of sadness. It's totally valid. But I'm just saying, like, there were no concerning emotions that came up. The emotions were more just like how my cat, I didn't think about this till just now. I didn't make this connection. How my cat feels at the vet of, I don't want to be perceived. Please just leave me. Just let me be. And through other psychic senses, I was able to put all those things together. But that was the first emotional response was just like, I just want to hide here. Like, don't notice me. I just want to be the mouse in the wall. So it can really help you to better understand what kind of spirit that you are dealing with, because I have had it where I've had spirits approach me who wanted to communicate with me, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, and were extremely rude. And sometimes when I was approached by spirits, I get anger from them, just full on rage and anger. And I'm like, no, I'm not going, if you're going to be this rage induced, this angry, if I'm not in the headspace and this comes out of left field where I'm not expecting it, then no, I can put up a boundary. So being able to empathically sense into that and feel that helps me to determine whether or not I need to hold a boundary with this spirit, this entity that I'm sensing. And if you are highly clairempathic, pet communication may actually be very easy for you if that is something you want to get into, because that's how pets communicate, which we've talked about previously. Hopefully previously at this point. Sometimes the episodes come out in a different order, but pets communicate mostly through emotion. And yes, it usually is a blend of different psychic senses, but you can tap in even further to your pets through your clear empathy. So even if you don't do readings for others, if you have a pet at home and you know that you can sense emotions through clear empathic abilities, through your psychic senses, you can definitely tap in even more with your pets. And that can be really helpful to assisting them with whatever it is that they may need. Also, if you're an energy worker, oh my gosh, it can be so helpful to have clear empathy because being able to sense and feel the emotions that are stuck in somebody's body can be such a amazing guiding light for you as you work on someone. So, as someone who has done Reiki for others, um, for clients, I've had this happen where I would be drawn to certain areas of the body, and my clear empathic ability would kick in, and I would emotionally feel. For example, one of the ones that happened was I emotionally felt like I was not safe. And then my other psychic senses kicked in and I got things like I'm not supported. And I was drawn to one specific area of the body and I could feel that that emotion is what was so intensely there in that area of the body. So being able to sense the emotions that are stuck in different areas of the body can be really helpful. And again, we're talking about things, not just negative emotions, but also positive ones. So, as an energy worker, if you sense positive emotions somewhere in the body that resonates with a memory or something of this person, um, and those emotions are really positive, happy, joyous, loving. You can use your energy work to enhance that emotion. And instead of having it just stuck in like one area of the body, because it's like, oh, right here, I'm feeling a lot of like positive emotions, be like, okay, now we're going to work that through the body and spread it out more. So it's not just here, it's throughout. So you can see how being clear empathetic can be really useful if you are an energy worker. And this all depends on the modality that you practice, because different modalities have different ways of working. Reiki's more about just go with the flow, let it go where it needs to go. And some other modalities are more about like, we're going to actually push and move and transmute. So just want to make that clear. And even if you aren't someone who practices professionally, even if you're not someone who is a reader for others, it can also help you to better understand yourself and your own emotions. It forces you to ask yourself, what do I need right now? It also forces you to practice healthy boundaries energetically and in the mundane because, like I've been talking about earlier throughout this episode, boundaries are not just about upholding an energy boundary. It's also about the physical, the mundane, doing that actual work. It's about saying no when you have to say no. It's about saying yes when you are saying, this would be really good for my mental health right now. Like for me, I'm going to say yes to sitting outside for an hour with my new book and sit in the sun. Even if I have things on my to-do list, those things on my to-do list can wait. I'm going to put a boundary on myself, on my workaholic. self and say, no, 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 no. We're going to go and take a breather first. When you are someone who is highly sensitive to energies or clairempathetic, and you start to work towards no longer just being an energetic sponge that absorbs everything and anything and then holding it, it really does force you to be better about your own boundaries and your own sense of self. Because you have to learn to feel your own feelings, because you have to be able to say, what do I need right now? How can I tend to myself in this moment? When you are forced to do that, like I was, it makes you way healthier mentally and emotionally for yourself. It is bettering for yourself. And this is the core that I really have been building up to. Not just how you can use it for others, but really how you can use it for you. Claire, empathetic abilities don't have to be all negative all the time. They don't have to be a burden. Yeah, it can be frustrating. Yeah, it can be a lot. And yeah, it can sound really annoying to be like, "Ah, I have to ask myself these questions. I have to process and feel the feelings because feelings are hard. I'm not going to act like it's not. It's hard to put into practice, and then it's hard to actually feel the feelings because it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel good all the time. And that's okay. And we want to acknowledge that. So by doing these things, you're also helping yourself. We want to flow with and move with our clear empathy for betterment of others, but more importantly, betterment of self. It's not selfish. It is not selfish to say, okay, I'm using this for me. I have this, so let me make use of it for me. So, if you consider yourself a clear empathetic person, I highly encourage you to embrace this psychic sense and explore it instead of getting stuck in feeling frustrated and saying, why me? Because that was me. Like I said, when I was first told, hey, you're an empath, you really need to like take better care of yourself in these ways and uphold these boundaries and yada yada yada. At first I was like, oh God, why me? This is so frustrating. This isn't, I remember thinking specifically, out of all the psychic senses one could have, this is the worst one to have. That I genuinely thought that. And you might too. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know. But I highly encourage you to acknowledge those feelings if you have them and say, okay, I acknowledge that I have this negative belief around this psychic sense. How can I release those negative beliefs around this psychic sense so I can better use it for me in my mundane life and for others if need be? How can I allow myself to be okay with knowing that, yeah, sometimes it's going to be, heavier feelings, but how can I also find the joy in it? How can I also find the positives in it? So it doesn't feel like such a burden, because it's not. Always, if whether or not you consider yourself a clairempathetic person with that psychic sense, if you're just someone who's sensitive to energies in general, always practice shielding and warding. And like I said, you can check out my class on this, but it is so important that as sensitives, as people who have these psychic senses and just what I like to say, being sensy overall, being sensitive overall, it's not a bad thing. It's just it can be a lot when we're not actively engaged with it, if we're not actively working with it and being mindful of it. So, asking yourself, all right, do I need to start putting up shields? How can I start making this a practice? How can I start sitting with my feelings? How can I start to see clear empathy as a positive rather than a frustrating negative? And make your clear empathetic gifts, not gifts, abilities and senses work for you. Also, just a quick note on why I keep trying to stop myself from saying gifts. In case you are curious, I don't like saying gifts because, as someone who was a professional artist, it was incredibly frustrating to constantly be told, "You're so gifted." You're so gifted. Uh, and this is the same when it comes to psychic senses and being an intuitive, a psychic, oracle reader, whatever you want to call it. Because while, yes, some people may be born with the inclination to easily access these parts of ourselves, it doesn't mean that others are not. And saying that someone is gifted is kind of implying that you have some sort of leg up or you have something that was given to you by something else, which I'm not saying that like our psychic senses aren't a part of something grander than ourselves, but it's not just given to us. It is often something we have to work towards. Even people who were born with certain inclinations towards certain psychic senses, different clair abilities, and this is going to have to be another episode, but even people who are inclined to those things naturally doesn't mean they don't have to hone those skills, doesn't mean that they don't have to ask the questions. It is a practice. It is a skill that is often taken, honed, and learned to advance. So this is why I don't like to say gifted, because artists, in the same vein, don't simply just know how to draw. Like, yes, they may have been drawing since they were a kid, but drawing every day, practicing every day, doing the work, studying how light affects form, anatomy, things of that nature, all create an artist who is more educated to be able to understand why these things are the way they are and how to use them in more advanced ways, and then they can bend or break the rules, which is a topic for another time. So let me know. Do you consider yourself as somebody with clairempathetic abilities? Have you experienced something similar to this? Share your stories with me. Send me an email at oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. If we get enough stories of people's personal experiences, I would love to do an episode simply dedicated to people's shared experiences. So if you have, like I said, a story about your own clairempathetic moments, or maybe you have your own spooky story, I want to hear it. I want to know. I would love to hear from you. Oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. And if you want to learn more, you can join me over on Patreon. I have free and paid membership access to things such as a monthly magical workshop, Q&A, behind the scenes, and so much more. And of course, you can always book a reading with me directly through my website, phantasmawitch.com, Fantasma witch, WITCH.com. And I have tarot reading, pet communication, palm reading, and consultations, as well as so much more. If you're not already watching this on YouTube, you can find me on YouTube. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok and Blue Sky. So, thank you, like always, for joining me in the parlor. I will see you next time. Have a magical day.